Good evening. I'm a doctor, specifically Baron Cohen, and we're going to be going over my two tests, the old one and the new one, about Asperger's and autism. The aim of this was to test whether a group of adults with Asperger's syndrome or high-functioning autism would be impaired on the revised version of the Reading the Mind and the Eyes task. There were 5 hypotheses, but we're just going to list 2 for the sake of this video. Number 1, participants with autism will score significantly lower scores on the revised version of the Reading the Mind in the Eyes task. The second one we will use is participants with autism will score significantly higher on the Autism Spectrum Quotient test. The triad of impairments are the difficulties with social interaction, difficulties with verbal and nonverbal communication, and a lack of theory of mind, which is a cognitive ability enabling us to realize that others have different feelings, beliefs, knowledge, and desires besides our own. Hi, I'm Baron Cohen, and I'm going to talk to you about my study, both the old and the new. Now, our aim was to test whether a group of adults with Asperger's syndrome or high-functioning autism would be impaired on the revised version of the Reading the Mind in the Eyes task.
Do you guys have any hypotheses?
Yes, we have 5, but for the sake of this video, we're only going to tell you 2. The first being, participants with autism will score significantly lower scores on the revised version of the Reading the Mind in the Eyes task. Our second one for this video will be, participants with autism will score significantly higher on the Autism Spectrum Quotient test. This was a laboratory experiment, as the environment in which the participants were tested was not comparable to an everyday situation. Participants in this experiment were asked to identify emotions from photographs, which is not a regular performed task. But let me give you a little explanation on what the Reading the Mind in the Eyes test was.
Ooh.
They had the different sexes, both male and female, there on pictures, photographs, and the autistic people would have to look in the eyes and have to judge whether complex or basic emotions and what it was and when and where.
Sounds good.
It does, right? Now, what's a quasi-experiment? Because that's what this is. Into frame comes my explainer.
A quasi-experiment. Quasi means almost. It refers to the fact that these experiments often have lots of control over the procedure, but not over how participants are allocated conditions within the study.
Now back to our regularly scheduled program. Let me tell you about the independent variable and the dependent variable.
What was the independent variable?
I'm glad you asked. I was going to tell you anyways, but now I'll just tell you sooner than expected. Well, I mean, now we're just lingering on because I'm trying to tell you about what would have happened if I wouldn't have been explaining this, if you wouldn't have asked that. But back to our regularly scheduled program. The independent variable was the type of participant in each condition. There were 3 control or comparison groups in this study. That's groups 2 through 4, which were group 2, the adult comparison group, which is comprised of normal adults who did not have a diagnosis of AS/HFA. They were selected from adult community and education classes in Exeter and public library users in Cambridge with a mean age of 46.5 years. The third group was the student comparison group. This group comprised of normal students who did not have a diagnosis of AS/HFA from Cambridge University with a mean age of 20.8 years. Cambridge is a highly selective university, so these students are not representative of the general population. Group 4 was an IQ matched group. The group comprised 14 IQ matched participants with those in the AS/HFA group with a mean age of 28 years and mean IQ score of 116. These participants were randomly selected from the general population. Then there was also the one group that was the experimental group, which was the AS/HFA. This group comprised of 15 adult males with AS or HFA with a mean IQ score of 115 and mean age of 29.7 years. The sample was self-selecting through adverts in the Autistic Society magazine and support groups and had all been diagnosed in specialist centers using the DSM or ICD criteria. There were 2 key measures of the dependent variable. The first was a score on the revised Reading the Mind in the Eyes task. For those participants in the AS/HFA and the IQ matched control group, there was also the measure of their scores on AQ test. Baron Cohen also measured the IQ scores of participants in the AS/HFA condition and the IQ matched comparison group.
I have a question. What's the AQ test?
Well, I'm glad you asked. The AQ test is actually the autism quotient test.
Nice.
We know that people are autistic if they have the triad of impairments. Now,
And what's the triad of impairment?
Well, there are 3, but I'm only going to tell you 2. Number 1, difficulties with social interaction. And number 2, difficulties with verbal and nonverbal communication. Now, autistic people also have an issue with an ability called the theory of mind.
What's theory of mind?
Well, I'm glad you asked. It's a cognitive ability enabling us to realize that others have different feelings, beliefs, knowledge, and desires besides our own.
Nice.
Now I'm going to tell you about the procedure. Now, there were 36 sets of eyes with 4 choices of motion on the face of the target, allowed as long as they need to view the pictures, and then the results were anonymized.
So they could see the pictures for as long as they wanted?
Yes, that's true.
Wow.
You gonna ask me about the apparatuses now?
Yeah, did you guys use any apparatuses?
Of course we did. We used photographs, IQ test, AQ test, eyes task, and the glossary. And if you want to include revised eyes task, just to be more specific, you certainly can.
All right, now I want to know the results.
Well, those with AS/HFA correctly identified significantly fewer target words. Sex was noticeable, so it was not included in the experiment. AS/HFA scored high on the AQ test, as expected.
Nice. So can you give me the quant information?
Do you want me to hit the quan?
No, silly. The quantitative information.
Yeah, because I don't know how to do that. So, let me tell you about the quantitative data. Group 1, the eyes test, they got an average score of 21.9. On the AQ test, an average score of 34.4. Now keep in mind this group 1 were the people with AS/HFA. Group 2, the adult comparison group, they got the eyes test average score 26.2. And they did not take the AQ test. Group 3, the student comparison group, got an eyes test score of 28 average. AQ test 18.3. Group 4, which was the IQ match group, got the eyes test average of 30.9 and AQ test 18.9. Now, the conclusions were AS/HFA participants have a deficit in cognitive process that allows a person to identify emotions in other individuals. This lack of ability to attribute emotions to another person is strongly linked to autism spectrum disorders.
Now, every experiment has strengths and weaknesses. Does this one?
Of course, and I'm going to tell you 2 strengths and 2 weaknesses right after I tell you that the AQ and eyes test has a 0. Okay, I'm sorry, that was such a...
You ran away.
I was like...
So every experiment has strengths and weaknesses.
That's
Does
true.
this one?
Of course it does, but I'm going to tell you 2 strengths and 2 weaknesses.
Okay.
First strength being, the main method was a laboratory experiment, as all participants completed the task in a standardized way in an artificial setting. This allowed many confounding variables to be controlled for as all participants saw the same set of eyes for exactly the same amount of time. And thus, this improves the internal-ability of the experiment and allows the researchers to be repeated to check the reliability of the results. Second strength is the validity of the eyes test has improved on previous versions due to the changes made, which have led to normal performance being significantly below the ceiling of the test. The first weakness I'm going to talk about is this was a natural quasi-experiment, and because Baron Cohen was not able to randomly allocate participants to the conditions, this introduces a confounding variable, as there could be another factor that is causing the difference between the scores in the different conditions, and this is one of the weaknesses. The second weakness that we're going to talk about, and the last one, is in an everyday situation, a person's eyes would not be static and shown for a limited amount of time, as such was the case in reading the minds in the eyes task. Consequently, any attempt to apply the results from this research to an everyday situation will be flawed. Do not do that again!